Woof woof! Hey guys, it's me Marcus, aka Mad Dog, and I'm back with another video. This video was suggested by Zoom. I'm going to put his Instagram up here. Please make sure that you give him a follow. He's supported the channel from day one. He's always trying to help the content get better, and he's just an overall good dude who's been a true dog from day one. And that topic, of course, is going to be my top 10 favourite Absolute Editions. Now, for me personally, I feel like the Absolute Edition is the grandest achievement when it comes to the collected editions. To know that a story is worthy of being in one of the biggest formats with a beautiful slipcase and a stupidly high cover price is something that I feel like every story should be working towards. Obviously not every release has been a home run and there's been some questionable decisions over the years, but once this topic was suggested I was so excited by it that I knew that I just had to do this. And before we even jump into this list, you might be wondering what the criteria is. Is it the best story? Is it the best production value? Is it the best extras or the best art? I don't really know, because even if I had some kind of criteria I'd probably end up breaking it at one point or another, so I thought it'd just be best to have a look at them and go, I prefer that one over that one, and explain my reasons. And of course you have to say this because it's YouTube and it's 2020, but this is my own personal list. If your favourite Absolute Edition isn't in the same place as mine, that's okay. That's not me saying that your list is wrong, it's personal to the individual and let's just have some fun with it. Starting off with number 10, and honestly it was more difficult to see which book was going to get this final spot on the list than it was to pick out my number 1. But honestly it would have felt incomplete if I didn't put Absolute Batman: The Black Mirror. This narrowly edged out quite a few other selections, and it's weird because this was an Absolute Edition that I never intended to pick up. I had Black Mirror in its original hardcover and it just felt like it was a story that I really enjoyed, but for some reason I just kept sleeping on this Absolute Edition. But the reason why this had to make it onto this list was mainly because of the jock art, but also because of the fact that it's about Dick Grayson. This is the quintessential story of him in the Batman role, probably more so than some of the Grant Morrison stuff. The art in this is just superb and you need it in the biggest format that you can get. I love the way that this was also a Jim Gordon storyline, much in a similar way of Batman Year One, and every time you turn the page I'm just blown away by the art. This is just a near perfect book, but I am still only putting it in the 10th position. I love the fact that we get the covers in the full display, which is the perfect way to enjoy them, and although there isn't too many extras in the back, you get a lot of rough work from Jock. You get some sketches, creator's note, and there's also a script for one of the issues. So although originally I didn't think there was too much here to warrant upgrading to an Absolute Edition, now that I've got it in my collection I can't imagine it without. Number 9, and I know that this is going to be a controversial pick that not a lot of people agree with me, it is Absolute Swamp Thing Volume 1. This is going to be the first of many Alan Moore books that are going to make it onto this list, and this was actually something that I only recently got. The reason why this is making it on the list rather than Absolute Swamp Thing Volume 2 that I got for about £23 is because of the fact that I've already read this part of the story when it was coming out in those trade paperbacks. So I know that I really like this, and just from a production standpoint, this book is beautiful. Obviously I understand that there was issues with the first printing, but that's not the one that I've got here. I'm sorry for anybody that has got that printing and hopefully you can get it replaced soon, but everything about this book from a design point just blows me away. Now I know some people didn't like the recolouring, but for me, because I didn't grow up reading this Swamp Thing, I think it's okay. I understand the appeal of the original colouring, but this just does something else to it and it just heightens it to a different level. And that's always going to be a matter of personal opinion whether you like the original or the recolouring. But this story just has so much depth to it. I like that it doesn't really strike me as a natural Alan Moore story in a similar way as something like V for Vendetta or Watchmen. I'm looking forward to reading the rest of this series, but just flicking through it I'm getting all these memories of when I read it years ago. Even the cover, there's this felt quality to it that just gives it like a mossy aspect, and if we're being honest, this book smells amazing. I honestly wish I could do a video that's like the top 10 best smelling books, but I don't really think anybody's got any interest in watching that. But if I was to do that, just like this list, Absolute Swamp Thing would easily make it onto it. Number 8, and I am going to cheat a bit, I've got Richard Stark's Parker the Martini edition. To me, this is super oversized, and it's got a slipcase, so for me, this is pretty much an Absolute edition. And it's collected by me Absolute edition, so for me, it'd be stupid to do this list and not mention this, because I love this book so much. I missed out on the first printing and there was no way that I was going to do this when I heard that it was getting a second chance and there's also going to be a follow-up volume. Again, this is a book that has such a unique smell to it, and you can't really flick through this book and not be blown away by at least some of Darwin Cook's art. The paper quality is also unique to this book. I heard that they tried to get it so that this could be printed on like old dollar bills at one point. I'm not really sure if they ended up following through with that, but this is one of those picks where the design of the book is as important to the story as the pictures and the writing that's on the pages. I'm amazed by this book, and if you only know Darwin Cook from DC The New Frontier, you need to check this out because it's still the same Darwin Cook style, but it shows a completely different range to him. It's such a shame that he's no longer with us, and I wish DC would just do like an absolute Darwin Cook where they collect Batman Ego and they collect Superman Kryptonite so that we can enjoy all of his art in this absolute size. This for me, in the way that the art tells the story, is up there with Sin City in the way that it can use so few colours but still express itself in such a unique and interesting way. I love this book, and even though it didn't come with too many extras in it, and that's something that I'm hoping is rectified in the second volume, despite the fact that it wasn't printed by DC, there is no way that I can do this list and not mention Richard Stark's Parker the Martini edition. If you're a fan of the Absolute edition, do yourself a favour and just buy this book. Number 7, and you shouldn't be surprised that he's already making his way onto this list again, it's the League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, the Absolute Edition Volume 1. This was a massive whale for the longest amount of time, and I think the main reason why this has made it onto this list rather than Volume 2 is because of the fact that I brought this for about 40 quid back in 2008 because of the fact that the guy accidentally listed it as Volume 2. So for me, it's just more the fact that I've got it because it was so rare at the time, and since then it seems like more people have reduced the price with stuff like the Omnibus coming out and things like that. And the main reason why I like this book probably more than most is because of the fact that you get the complete Alan Moore scripts with it. I'm going to put a side by side to illustrate it, but that middle massive paragraph is just for one panel on page 2. There's so much detail that goes into these scripts, especially if you've seen scripts from other writers and maybe they just put, hey, there's a lot of action and there's a car chase, but you compare what is in the scripts to what you actually get into the final product. And because Kevin O'Neill's one of those artists that's got such rich detail in his work, the Absolute Edition is definitely the best way to go about this. For me, this book is great because it allows you to experience what it's like reading the script and then seeing the final product. It's almost like having a director's commentary that you can read side by side. And if I'm being honest, I probably didn't understand what the League of Extraordinary Gentlemen was when I originally read it, because I didn't really know too many of the characters, but since going to university and studying literature, every time I come back to this, I get a little bit more out of it. So I know this is a story that I'm going to enjoy for years to come. It definitely earns its spot on this list, and I think if you're somebody that's interested in more the behind the scenes of comic book creation, you should definitely try and hunt this down. Might as well double up on Alan Moore because I'm going to go with Batman the Killing Joke. It was a close race, but it came down between this and Batman Year One because of the fact that I like how it gives you two different versions of the story. This one edged it as well just for being so unique, in the fact that, so you see that you've got this cover here, it's very iconic, while the inside of the book shows it just from two different sides. But this is quite a short story, and I remember when it got announced that it was getting an Absolute Edition, people wondered why this was going to get it. It's pretty much a short story that's less than 100 pages, and the paperback I think was less than about £5, but this had the original colouring and the remastering. So if you were annoyed about Swamp Thing and you didn't like that it had this modernised colouring, you can just flip through and you can get the original colouring in the same book. The reason why this gets a nod over Batman Year One is because of the fact that this was priced correctly as well. Batman Year One had a cover price of about 100 quid over here in the UK. I got this for about less than 20 quid, and it's a story that I have read multiple times over the years. I first read it because of Heath Ledger's performance in The Dark Knight, and then I saw this remastered colouring. I never knew what the original colouring was like, so for me, somebody that's read this book for years, it was nice to be able to go back in time and see what this was like when it first came out. And again, you get the full script and there's still quite a wealth of extras behind it. You get some sketches, some layouts, you get some covers that Brian Boland's done. This is just a great book, and I think with the price that it's at, this is a great introduction if you've never got an Absolute Edition before. Now, before we break into the top 5, I just want to remind you that if you're enjoying this video, please give it a thumbs up. I know that I'm definitely having too much fun doing this list, but as well, if you haven't done so already, please click that subscribe button down below and click the bell notification so that you never miss out on a video. Number 5, and it was really difficult to place these next 5 books in this list. Honestly, it kept changing, and it's been changing whilst I've been doing this video, but I finally settled on the 5th place being Absolute All-Star Superman by Grant Morrison. I loved this book, and I remember when the Absolute Edition got announced, I pre-ordered it over from America at the same time when they were doing that like $15 sale on omnibuses. That's how long it's been that I've had this book. I got it from day one, and of course I did. I like the production value on the fact that the Superman logo doesn't really show up unless you catch it at the right angle. There's just beautiful Frank Quitely art throughout, and this book is just good start from finish. Grant Morrison can be very divisive. I know there's some people who just don't like him, who think he tries to be too wacky for his own good, but All-Star Superman is one of those books that I think is accessible to near enough anyone. You don't need to have read Superman for years before to know what's happening. This is basically the last Superman story, and it's basically Grant Morrison reminding us why this character is so important. You see him try to accomplish all these tasks that he's put in place for himself before he eventually goes, so that he can make sure that he's left a legacy and tried to do the best that he can for Earth. But the reason why I really like this beyond just a story is the extras in the back. You don't really get too many, but I like the concept designs from Frank Quitely. Like, you see how he differentiates between Superman and Clark Kent, so it makes it a bit more believable that nobody'd ever suss out his real identity. And it talks a lot about the thought process behind a lot of the characters, but it's also got the 12 labours of Superman in the back. And as well, this is just the best way to experience this art. It's a great story start from finish, and I think it's so underrated considering the fact that at the time when it came out, there was just so much buzz about this story, but now it just doesn't seem to really get talked about. But this is something that's always going to be in my collection, and I think it's a book that could make non-Superman fans a fan of Superman. Number 4, and I'm probably going to regret putting this so high in the list when I end up editing this footage. This very easily could have been in the 2nd and 3rd place, but that is absolute DC The New Frontier. Darwyn Cooke, man, what can I say about him that hasn't already been said before? This is his magnum opus. When you think Darwyn Cooke, you think DC The New Frontier. If you can't be bothered to read the full 10 years of the Jeff Johns Green Lantern run, this is the Hal Jordan story. This is also the Barry Allen story. It's the formation of the Justice League. You get a great Martian Manhunter story as well, but beyond just that, this art is phenomenal. This was the perfect setting for Darwyn Cooke to write a book because he's got that vivid pop art style that's similar to like a Jack Kirby, but at the same time it's modernised to the point where it's accessible for somebody reading it today. The first time I read this, I was way too young, and I remember not really liking it even though I really enjoyed the art. I'm glad I went back to it because this is probably now one of my top 10 favourite comics, so I'm so glad that DC decided to reprint this, give us the special issue 1 in the back as well, and considering that Darwyn Cooke was an artist that we lost way too soon, I'm just glad that we can enjoy some of his stories in the best format possible. And as well, there's just so many extras in the back that it makes it worth the cost of the book alone. You get to see pretty much every single reference, whether it be to the time or the original comics that he was referencing, and you get all the covers, and it's just so much more vibrant than that deluxe edition that I had. Because I had that as well because I thought they were never going to reprint the Absolute edition, and that had like a more matte paper quality. So I'm glad that this has got the big glossy pages, and because this came out, I sold my deluxe edition, and because that had gone out of print, I actually ended up pretty much getting this copy for free. It's crazy when that happens, so the fact that this book pretty much cost me nothing and is still one of the best books in my collection, there is no way that it's not going to make it on this list. We're getting into the top 3, and honestly this list has been so difficult because like I said, this could have easily been number 2 as well, but I went with Absolute Preacher Volume 1. Obviously I've got all 3 volumes, but Volume 1 has such a special place in my heart. This first part of the story always reminds me of when I first started going into comic shops and I was getting recommendations and I was finally branching out from DC and Marvel. I wanted them to do an Absolute edition for years because I just had the trade paperbacks, and eventually they did it, and then this came out and it blew away my expectations. This might be the nicest designed book that I've got in my collection altogether because this is basically crafted as if it is a Bible. Sure, some people might argue that the art isn't that great that it should be in the Absolute edition, but for me, because of just what this story means, there was no way that I was going to pass this up. I love Preacher, and it's a story that I've recommended to people that don't even read comics. And yeah, sure, it might seem a bit juvenile to some people, and it might just seem a little bit long-winded, and then it loses a bit of its own pacing, but for what this story meant for me, especially in the way that I've gone about reading comics since then, there is no way that Absolute Preacher Volume 1 is not going to make it high on this list. But every time I do a shelfie, this is the book series that everybody says, what are these? What is this? It's like the nicest looking book that they've ever seen. And I completely agree, and because I can't really say too much more without completely spoiling Preacher, this is going to take the bronze medal and make it on the 3rd place on this list. Number 2, and taking the silver medal and making his final appearance on this list, it is Absolute Watchmen. I've had this book for years, and I remember that I read Watchmen, and because I had a paper round at the time, I had to wait until I got my Christmas tips so that I could finally buy this for myself. This is the 2nd Absolute edition that I ever got, and because Watchmen is pretty much Alan Moore's magnum opus, you need this this format size to be able to see as much detail as there is. It's similar to what I said about the League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, but there's just so much that has gone into this book that for me to really enjoy it, I need it in the biggest oversized format that I could find. This as well is probably one of the books that I pull down from the shelves most and I just flick through because I just enjoy it so much. There's so much depth and you learn so much more each and every time you read about the story. And there's quite a lot of extras in the back as well, and it's just fun pouring through these. And obviously we've got that like separate book that I've got at my mum and dad's house, that one that's like Who Watches the Watchmen, where it's all pretty much about the construction of this book. But I also think there's a lot of detail in this Absolute Edition as well, so that you're perfectly fine not picking that one up. But for me, Watchmen is one of those stories that every comic reader has to read at least once, even if pretty much none of us have ever properly read the pirate part. I've probably read this about 8 or so times now. It never gets old. It's always going to be one of those timeless stories for me, so of course it's going to make it on this list, even if it just falls short of that first place position. Now before getting to my number one pick, I'm going to give some honourable mentions because it'd be impossible not to. I'm not going to pull them all down off the shelf in case it makes the rest of the books tip over, but I'm going to give an honourable mention to Absolute Luthor Joker. I love the production value of this book, and Liber Mayhew's art needs to be experienced in the biggest format possible. I like that you also get 2 different stories with this, and I wish that was something that they would have done with probably Batman Year 1. You know, combine it with something like Batman Year 100 or something like that. And I just like the fact that you get 2 separate hardcovers within this Absolute Edition. Not a lot of people like it, but then again it's my list. I'm going to give Absolute Superman for Tomorrow an honourable mention, mainly just for the Jim Lee art. I love flicking through this book even if the story isn't that great, but it has been years since I've read it and I've always been wondering if it's something that I should go back to. But there was no way I wasn't going to pick this up. I'm a massive Jim Lee fan and it's going to get an honourable mention. Absolute V for Vendetta, again this is one of the nicest smelling books that I've ever owned, and it's another one of those timeless stories. And as well, with it being set in London, that's always quite fun for me to read, and especially for the production value because it feels as if the slipcase has got something on it that's slightly raised on the flower. Absolute Dark Knight almost made it onto this list, but because of how much I don't really like the Absolute Dark Knight Strikes Again, it just didn't really cut the mustard. But I do really like the Dark Knight Returns, and seeing it in this format is just something that's great, and it has got such a lot of extras in it that it did very nearly make it on here. But there is one Absolute Edition that probably means more to me than any of the others on this list. I may be a little bit biased because it was the first Absolute Edition that I ever owned, but it's something that's stuck with me for years since. It's probably one of my most read books. It's probably the book that I've flicked through the most, the book that I've shown to the most people, and that is Absolute Batman Hush. Some people hate this story, and I understand that, but then again, this is my list. If you made your own list and Absolute Batman Hush isn't number one, I'm not really going to call you out for it. But for me, if I watched myself back making this list and Absolute Batman Hush wasn't number one, I'd be calling myself out. Oh my god, was this the perfect introduction to the Absolute format. This book is gorgeous top to tail, and I think I got this back in like 2007, and it was on Forbidden Planet's website, the Forbidden Planet that doesn't really have a website anymore, and I think I got it for about £30, which yes, back then was about 2 weeks worth of pocket money. But oh my god, do I love this story, and it's like the perfect introduction into the Batman universe. It showcases so many characters, and it's drawn by one of the best people in the industry, Jim Lee, and this Absolute Edition just makes all those colours so vibrant. It makes the story really jump off the page. You've got the fight between Superman and Batman, you've got Poison Ivy's inclusion into it, you've got Catwoman throughout the story, you've got Nightwing coming into it, and yes, even though I didn't really enjoy the ending as much as I thought I would have done, this story overall is one of my favourites. I genuinely remember when I first got this, I spent so long just flicking through the extras in the back. It had all the covers, it's got all the designs that they did to make the toy line, it's even got sketches that Jim Lee did for people at different conventions. And this book as well is the sole reason why I want that Batman by Paul Dini omnibus that nobody can seem to find. Cause I like this Hush storyline so much that I wanted to see where else it went, even if it meant that it wasn't drawn by Jim Lee. But for me, if I was going somewhere for a very long time and I could only take one Absolute Edition with me, it's definitely going to be Absolute Batman Hush. But that's my list, and like I said, this was so difficult to do, and I'm so glad that Zoom suggested this, because it's been really enjoyable, because it reminds me that there's so many of these books on the collection that have just been sitting on my shelves for years that I love so much and that I really need to spend a bit more time with. So apologies in advance to my girlfriend if you're watching this, because I've rediscovered my love for the Absolute Edition and I'm going to have to spend more time with them. So I'm probably going to have to take that out with the quality time that I have with you. But like I said, I had such a good time doing this list, and I want you to put in the comment section below what are your favourite Absolute Editions, and also what are some of the books that you wish would get an Absolute Edition, and why is it Power Girl? As well, if you enjoyed this video as much as I enjoyed making it, please give it a thumbs up, and if you didn't enjoy this video, why did you get this far? Please subscribe subscribe if you haven't done so already and click that bell notification. I'm going to do a special live stream when we get to 1,000 subscribers. I know we did one previously, but I've got a few surprises that I'm going to bring into this one. And follow me on my social media links. I make sure that I put as much comic content on there as I can. If you do want to support the channel, it is greatly appreciated. And I don't really have like anything that I could offer that really warrants me doing a Patreon, but what I do ask is that you treat yourself to a book and that you use one of the Amazon affiliate links down below. I can't see any of your details. It doesn't increase the price. It just means that eventually there is going to be some money coming into this channel. But that's the video and I'm hoping you've enjoyed it. But please just remember to stay safe, keep reading and keep barking all you mad dogs, and I'll see you at the next video.